The Hoenn region is very much a fan favorite and holds a special place in a lot of people's hearts. It began the franchise's time on the Game Boy Advance, and with the added power, the games were able to try out a lot of new stuff. This gave the games a lot of new enjoyable features, but we also ended up with some unusually interesting things to come out of this generation because of it. Today we are going to be highlighting this kind of stuff and looking at some obscure secrets and Easter eggs from the Hoenn-based games that symbolize the third generation of Pokémon. One interesting thing that comes out of the original Ruby and Sapphire concerns what you might call an oversight by the developers. Route 134 that lies directly to the east of Slateport City is a long expanse of treacherous water filled with fast currents, jagged rocks, and shallow shores. On the southeast end of the route, there is a shallow point in the water that can be walked on with some current water next to it. This water, as the name implies, has a specific current that forces you in one direction when you surf on it, except in this instance there is one current tile in this area that actually cannot be surfed on and can be walked on instead. Unlike other water tiles, you can actually step onto it as if it were land, although its properties as a current tile just push you back onto the shallow water. This is an interesting thing to find on just a single tile in a remote corner of the overworld, where it seems like the developers made a slight mistake and simply just didn't notice it before it was too late to correct it. One iconic moment of the Hoenn games comes right at the beginning when you're introduced to Professor Birch. Instead of him being in his lab, he's out in the field, getting chased by a Zigzagoon when you first encounter him. He asks you for help by using one of the Pokemon in his bag to ward off the Zigzagoon, which is how you choose your starter in the games. However, have you ever wondered what would happen if you actually lose to this Zigzagoon? Most people probably haven't experienced this themselves, as it's basically impossible to lose to Zigzagoon without actually trying to, but if your health gets low enough in this battle, the Zigzagoon will actually just run away. It makes sense as you have to win this battle to progress the story, but it's interesting that Game Freak actually did implement a failsafe for this scenario just in case, one that most of us would never see anyway. Another thing in Ruby and Sapphire that's basically impossible to see without actually trying to see it occurs in the Oceanic Museum. It costs 50 Pokédollars to get into the museum, which is just about the cheapest anything can possibly be in a Pokemon game. This is partly due to the fact that you have to go to the Oceanic Museum to deal with Team Magma or Team Aqua the first time you're in Slateport City. But if you're a terrible money manager and you don't have the 50 Pokédollars to get into the museum, another special scenario will occur. If you lack the money and attempt to go into the museum while it's still occupied by either of the evil teams, the receptionist who stops you and normally asks you for an entrance fee will instead mistake you for a member of Magma or Aqua and let you in for free. This once again is for the purpose of the story, since you have to go to the museum to move forward, but practically no one would see this in a normal situation, so it's a cool little detail that in most situations would go unnoticed. Something that does not appear in the original Hoenn games at all, but is still present in their data, is a peculiar little piece of Game Freak's history. Found in the data of Ruby and Sapphire, a sprite from Game Freak's very first title they ever developed, Mendel Palace, can be found. What's even more interesting though is that it's an updated version of the sprite that would be fit for the Game Boy Advance instead of just the regular NES one, which means that Game Freak deliberately made this and put it in the games for some reason. The most likely scenario is that it was used for testing purposes while developing Ruby and Sapphire, and they simply made the sprite as a bit of fun and reminiscence. Whatever the reason is though, it's a fun little Easter egg and not exactly something you'd expect to find in the data of a Pokemon game. One thing that is obscure by today's standards, but was just how things went back in the day, concerns the infamous berry glitch of Ruby and Sapphire. In early runs of the game, there was a glitch that would cause the internal clock to stop a year after the game was started, and subsequently would delay all time-based events in the game for a year as well, which most notably causes berries in the game to stop growing, which is where the glitch got its name. The glitch itself is noteworthy enough on its own, but what I personally find so interesting and obscure about it is the way that this glitch was fixed at the time. There obviously weren't downloadable patches the way we have them today at the time, so the way Nintendo went about fixing this was a little bit different than you normally expect. While there were a number of different ways to fix affected cartridges, including sending it directly to Nintendo, Game Freak also offered fixes in their other Gen 3 games like Fire Red, Leaf Green, and Emerald, via a downloadable patch that was included in those titles. Using this method, you would take an affected Ruby or Sapphire cartridge, connect it to a Fire Red, Leaf Green, or Emerald cartridge via a link cable, and then download the patch from the newer games via a special menu that could be accessed via the title screen. Similar methods of patching the game were also offered via Pokemon Coliseum, XD Gale of Darkness, Pokemon Channel, and Pokemon Box Ruby and Sapphire. And concerning sending the game directly to Nintendo, they did not stop offering this as a service until August of 2012, which was only a little over a year before Generation 6 was about to be started and less than half a year before it was officially revealed. That's certainly some great customer service from them, and an interesting look into how games went about solving those sorts of issues at the time, when today all it takes is a simple download. Pokemon games have a history of containing events that were meant to be used, but never saw the light of day, and one such event that's especially interesting has to do with the Altering Cave. This location is present in the final games themselves, appearing in Fire Red, Leaf Green, and Emerald versions, but it never got to do what it was actually meant to. In the games as it stands, the cave is rather unimportant, being pretty small in size, and Zubat being the only Pokemon that you can find there. However, Altering Cave was planned for more than this originally, as it was planned to be part of a unique event distribution that would allow you to catch rare Pokemon here. It was planned that you would be able to take your game to a store or special kiosk and use the mystery gift function to change the Pokemon that were available inside the cave. Through this event, you would have been able to find Pokemon like Shuckle, Houndour, Smeargle, Mareep, and others that you wouldn't normally be able to find in the Gen 3 games. But even though the data is there and Altering Cave is an accessible location, this event went completely unused, therefore making the cave basically worthless unless you're a Zubat fan, of course. This is one of the more unique event ideas that we've ever seen in Pokemon, and the fact that it went unused makes it even more peculiar. What's even more interesting though is that Shuckle's intended appearance in this area would have been how you could obtain the berry juice in the Generation 3 games, but since it was scrapped, the item is completely unobtainable, meaning that the effects of this cancelled event are even bigger than just a few unreleased Pokemon. One cool thing that occurred in Generation 3 was that Pikachu actually got a signature move. Its iconic Volt Tackle was first introduced in this generation, and much like other things we've talked about, it's got an interesting connection to Game Freak history as well. The Japanese name of the move is Voltecker, which is the same name as the name of a move that Pulseman uses, the titular character of another Game Freak developed title that was made prior to Pokemon releasing. Considering the move was given to the mascot of the franchise, I think this was a pretty fitting and cool reference to make. So in the current generation of Pokemon, I think we all know there's been a thing or two that has happened which has ruffled some feathers, but there's evidence that something not so different has already happened before, and well before people started to get upset about it. One of the things about the Gen 3 games and the leap to the Game Boy Advance is that there was no way to transfer Pokemon from the Gen 1 and 2 games up to Gen 3, marking the only time that Pokemon were non-transferable from one generation to the next. In addition, not every single Pokemon was obtainable in these games natively, meaning that they did not have all the Pokemon, just as is the case with Sword and Shield. As an alternative to this though, to allow people to access all the Pokemon, Fire Red and Leaf Green were made, and this is one of the primary reasons why those Gen 1 remakes exist in the first place. It's long been assumed that technical limitations were the reason for the lack of transferring in Gen 3, but there's evidence that originally all the Pokemon were going to be available in Ruby and Sapphire in one way or another. On an early edition of the box art, the classic catchphrase, "Gotta catch 'em all," was displayed, meaning that at one point the games would have likely been intended to have all the Pokemon available, but upon the realization that transferring would not be possible, the slogan was taken off, as at that point you wouldn't have been able to catch them all anymore. That's one way of looking at it anyway, but for all we know, another thing could have also happened. Ruby and Sapphire were going to have every single Pokemon originally based on this evidence, but instead Game Freak decided to withhold some and release the rest in Fire Red and Leaf Green, incentivizing that people buy both sets of games to get all the Pokemon. When you think about it, it really does make a lot of sense considering Fire Red and Leaf Green were made only 8 years after the originals and with a pretty minor jump in graphical quality as far as remakes are concerned, so there really wasn't a need for these games to exist other than to try and move more units by making them necessary to obtain all the Pokemon in the games. For all I know, this isn't the case at all. I just think it's funny how a very similar situation to what's going on now in Gen 8 could have actually occurred in Gen 3 as well, yet no one really complained about it then, and it has literally never been an issue. It's very curious, but that's all I'm gonna say about that. And to round off the video, we've got a couple things of note from Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. The first one is an interesting reference that's made in Seed Mauville. As you're exploring, you might come across a couple in this area that'll challenge you to a double battle, and their names are Hal and Lois. If you've ever seen the TV show Malcolm in the Middle, you'd recognize this as a reference since Hal and Lois are the names of the parents in that show. This is a cool reference for sure, but of all the super popular TV shows out there, it does seem like somewhat of an interesting choice. Someone over at Game Freak's localization team must be a big fan of the show. Next, we have something that, truthfully, isn't really much more than a coincidence, but it's still a cool connection to make. One thing that Ruby and Sapphire are known for almost more than anything else are their infamous Braille puzzles that are required to be solved in order to gain access to the Regis. It's one of the coolest methods of obtaining a legendary ever, if not one of the most random as well. What's funny though is that the Braille language was invented by Louis Braille, and he was from France where the Kalos region is based, and it's the Kalos region that released in Gen 6 alongside the Gen 3 remakes where the puzzles appear, and who also probably have the biggest connection of any region to Hoenn thanks to this. It seems to be just a case of good timing more than anything, but it's a cool little bit of explanation for one of the more inexplicable features that we've ever seen in a Pokemon game. And there we have it. Thank you all so much for watching my video. Be sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe if you're new if you enjoyed, and if you want to support the channel more, you can check out my Pokemon remixes on Spotify, which is greatly appreciated. I also just uploaded a brand new trailer for my Pokemon Cardinal project, which is coming soon, so if you haven't seen that yet, I highly recommend you check it out. I'll see you guys with another video on Thursday, and until then, as always, I hope you're all doing well, and I will smell you guys later.